Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday. The two spoke over a video call. Putin wants Xi to visit Moscow next year and claimed that ties between the two neighbors have never been better.
В условиях усиливающейся геополитической напряженности
In the face of increasing geopolitical tension, the significance of the Russian-Chinese strategic partnership is growing as a stabilizing factor. Our relations withstand all tests with dignity, demonstrate maturity and stability, and continue to expand dynamically. As we noted earlier, these ties are the best in history. They represent a model of cooperation between major powers in the 21st century.
являются наилучшими за всю историю.
While Putin says he expects Xi to visit next year, China has not confirmed the visit yet. Beijing also maintained its diplomatic stance on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, neither condemning nor supporting it. China has so far called for peace and continues to blame the West for provoking Russia. It has also slammed the sanctions that have been imposed on Moscow since the war began. Russia, in turn, has supported China as it ramps up the rhetoric on Taiwan. China has always claimed the self-governed island as part of its territory and refused to rule out using military force to bring it into the Chinese fold. During the call, Putin also pledged to increase military cooperation with China.
Особое место во всем комплексе.
A special place in the entire range of Russian-Chinese cooperation and our relations is occupied by military and military-technical cooperation, which contributes to ensuring the security of our countries and maintaining stability in key regions. We aim to strengthen the cooperation between the armed forces of Russia and China.
России и Китая.
Trade between Russia and China has increased since the war, with Russia looking eastwards after the imposition of sanctions. It has overtaken Saudi Arabia as the top crude supplier to China, and bilateral trade has soared. On Friday, Russia doubled the maximum possible share of Chinese yuan in its national wealth fund. It now stands at 60%. This is part of Russia's efforts to end its dependence on what it calls unfriendly nations. Both China and Russia have called their relationship a no-limits partnership. It's a partnership that has been growing since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. On Friday, Xi Jinping said China was ready to build strategic cooperation with Russia.
In the face of a difficult and far from unambiguous international situation, we are ready to build up strategic cooperation with Russia, provide each other with development opportunities, be global partners for the benefit of the people of our countries and in the interests of stability throughout the world.
Xi says he's interested in global stability, but wars are not known for that. There seems to be no clear end in sight for the war in Ukraine. On Friday, Russia expressed concern after a Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile landed in Belarus. Belarus and Russia are close allies. Military activity in Belarus has been growing in recent months. However, Minsk has maintained that it will not participate unless its own security is threatened. But now Russian media claims that Belarus's Security Council has said it was unlikely that the missile entered Belarusian airspace by accident. The council has reportedly said there is likely to have been some intention behind the missile launch. Meanwhile, Ukraine does not want to engage in peace talks till it recovers all the land Russia has annexed. Therefore, the two sides don't look like they're going to back down anytime soon. Both Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky are expected to address their nations at the turn of the year. As things stand, it doesn't seem like the new year will usher in peace. For more on this, we are now joined by Glenn Deason from Oslo. He is a professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern Norway. Thanks very much for joining us, Glenn Deason. Now, let me ask you this. China is one of the few countries to have expressed support for Russia in many ways since the invasion of Ukraine, or at least a country that has refused to condemn Russia. In view of today's talks between Putin and Xi Jinping, how do you think this so-called no-limits partnership is progressing? Clearly, they both have a common adversary, the West.
Well, definitely. And this is why this partnership has been developing for so long now. It definitely has intensified this year, but the war in Ukraine actually began in 2014 after the United States and some of its Western partners toppled the government in Ukraine. That's when first the conflict began in Donbass and the sanctions began against Russia. This is when Russia effectively gave up on its former dream of creating a greater integrated Europe. And since then, its new goal has been what it calls Greater Eurasia. So integrate its economy with the great powers in the East. So China, India, Iran, Korea, all the big ones in the East. So, but obviously China is the most important one, given that they have both the capability and the intention of challenging the economic leadership of the United States. So both countries face a huge security threat from the United States. For Russia, their concern since 2014 is that the Americans have toppled the government in Ukraine and building up an army to threaten Russia. And meanwhile, for the Chinese, they're worried that the Americans are trying to undermine the One China policy by pushing towards Taiwanese secession. So for this reason, both of them see the U.S. as their main threat. And again, this is how the United States works. It's a hegemonic power. So the rise of any rivals, it will see as a challenge. So it's going after both. And this is also a key driver of cooperation between China and Russia. But obviously, they also have a lot of common interest in terms of military cooperation, but also economic in many spheres: technology, transportation corridors, use of local currencies, development of new development banks, payment systems. So it's a very huge partnership they actually have going on right now. And after this phone call, it appears that this partnership will only continue to move forward.
Well, the partnership will continue to move forward. The common enemy for the two countries clearly is the United States. Let me ask you this, Glendizin. Even though Putin's claimed in his statement to the Russian state broadcaster a few days ago that he was willing to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine, fact of the matter is, going by their actions, both Putin and Zelensky seem to be digging their heels in. Therefore, do you see any hope of the early part of 2023 bringing the war to an end? When the two leaders address their nations at the turn of the year, what do you expect them to say?
It depends. Russia said that it's willing to start negotiations without any conditions. I think some of the problem is I don't think the United States would like to start negotiations yet. This has been a part of the problem for the past 8 years. Keep in mind that after the U.S. toppled the Ukrainian government in 2014, this is when a lot of the initial war in Donbass began. And we initially had a Minsk peace agreement in February of 2015, but the United States undermined and sabotaged it for 7 years. And that's how when Russia responded by unfortunately invading Ukraine. Now, what's interesting is people say that Russia's not willing to make any compromise or negotiate. But if you see all the reports from late March, early April, Putin and Zelensky was very close to an agreement, to a peace agreement, which would have ended this war in its beginning. And what Russia wanted was, no neutrality for Ukraine, so no NATO or US weapon systems along its borders. But then Boris Johnson and Biden effectively promised Zelensky, they pressured him not to sign the peace agreement. Instead, they said, we give you all the weapons you need if you just fight the Russians instead. And that's what's been happening ever since. So I don't think it's gone so far now. I don't think there's any scope for a reasonable peace agreement, because at the moment, as this war dragged on, Russia annexed 4 territories. That is, it annexed Donbass, that is Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye and Kherson, and so now that has complicated the geopolitical conflict even more, because it's impossible for Ukraine to accept losing these 4 territories. Meanwhile, for Russia, they're not going to walk back this. So as this war drags on, having a peace agreement becomes only more and more complex.
All right. So it does look like a peace agreement is not really on the horizon at the moment. But as you mentioned, this war has dragged on for 10 months now, and the impact has been felt by the entire world. And what the world does need more than anything else really is peace. Let's certainly hope that 2023 can usher in that much needed peace. Glendizin, thank you so much for speaking to WION.
My pleasure.